So I've spoken in the past about the fact that Tantra is not confined to any one specific culture. It is a science for exploring consciousness, expanding, experiencing, understanding. So there is a strong association between Tantric yoga and the Indian tradition, and that's understandable because what we know as Tantra culturally comes from India. However, like I said, this is a perennial tradition, Tantric yoga, so we can apply it in any cultural context. And today, I'm going to explain how we can look at the development of consciousness within ancient India and see a very similar development of consciousness that happened in America, in the United States. Now, why would we want to study the cultural development of consciousness? How does that relate to our own yoga practice? Within Tantra, we see the external world as being a mirror for what happens inside of us. So, the civilizational development that you can observe and understand in ancient India, that same process can happen and is happening inside of you. So we can look inward to understand what's happening outside of us, and we can look outside of us to understand what's happening on the inside. Now, culture is important because we all have specific expressions of culture that we personally resonate with. And that's why we should give ourselves the freedom, the flexibility to explore culture. Because what I resonate with might not be what you resonate with, and that's okay. We can still practice Tantric yoga within the cultural framework that works for us. So I'm going to give you two cultural frameworks today that you can examine that will teach you something about the relationship between Shiva and Shakti, inside of you and outside of you. And then you can take this principle, this understanding of how Shiva and Shakti relate to one another, and you can apply it in other cultural contexts. So basically, this is a key of understanding that is not limited to the cultural frameworks that we're going to discuss today. So the first cultural framework that I'm going to discuss is the interrelationship between the Vedic culture in ancient India and the Dravidian culture. So just a little bit of historical background here. The Vedic culture is what we call an Indo-Aryan culture, meaning that the origins of the Vedic culture can be found in the ancient Aryans. And the ancient Aryans lived in what is now the region of Iran and Afghanistan. And they spread out. They spread west into Europe, founded many civilizations in Europe, great civilization. And then they also went down into northern Asia, into what is now India. Now, the Vedics, they were a pastoral people, meaning that their civilization relied upon livestock, and they were horse riders. They were essentially cowboys. So this gave them an edge over agricultural civilizations, which you could say are primitive civilizations in comparison to the pastoralists. So when the Indo-Aryans spread out, they took their horses and they took their pastoral practices, which made them into great conquerors, and they established civilizations, empires throughout Europe and northern Asia. And the Vedic civilization is the empire that these Indo-Aryan pastoralists established within what is now India. So there are specific gods, a specific pantheon of gods that the Indo-Aryans resonated with. They gave birth to these god forms, and we can find echoes of this all throughout Europe and in India to this day. The Vedic civilization started out with a pretty strong balance between what we call the Shiva principle and the Shakti principle. So the Shiva principle, I'm not talking about the god Shiva, but I'm talking about the principle of Shiva, the principle of consciousness. The Shiva principle is order and inertia, okay? And the Shakti principle, not the goddess Shakti, but the principle of consciousness, Shakti, is activity and chaos, all right? And we find a balance between these two principles inside of us and outside of us. Within the framework of a socio-religious culture like the Vedic civilization, we have certain gods that represent the masculine expression of Shiva and certain gods that represent the feminine expression of Shakti. And for a civilization to last, to sustain itself, there needs to be some kind of balance, some kind of interplay between order and chaos, between inertia and activity, Shiva and Shakti. There are tendencies in certain civilizations to swing towards one side of the equation over the other. And for the Vedics, historically, we saw a swing towards order, a swing towards the masculine principle of Shiva. This is something that we also saw in the Hellenistic tradition. This is something that we see today in India and in other places as well. But there's a civilizational swing towards order over chaos. Now, when this happens, there needs to be a rebalancing force that introduces the people to Shakti once again. This occurred within India. So we have the Vedic civilization, pyramidal structure, the Brahmin caste at the top of the pyramid, and the Brahmin caste is traditionally associated with Shiva and the divine masculine principle. Okay? Power shifting up until there is a severing of the connection to the earth, to the chaotic expression of animalistic consciousness that we associate with Shakti and the Shudra caste. So there's a severing of the relationship between the Brahmin caste, between the priesthood, and the Shudra caste, or the working class. Right? Now, there was a process of reintegrating Shakti that happened within India. And the Tantrics played an important role here because the Tantric yogins, seeing that there was an imbalance in society, they couldn't relate to the culture in such a way that they could have internal balance. Because by bringing their focus to the culture, the Vedic culture, their consciousness was pulled upward to Shiva. So they needed a counterbalance so that they could achieve holistic expressions of consciousness, or yoga, union. So what they did was they went south into India and they observed the practices of the Dravidian people. Now, the Dravidian people are people of the earth, or at least at that time, they were very much mother cultists. And the expression of the Divine Mother that they were worshiping was a proto-form of Kali. So, Kali being associated with the Muladhara chakra, this is a great counterbalance to the Sahasrara chakra and the spiritualism of the ancient Vedic civilization. So the Tantrics learned from the Dravidians. They integrated the Dark Mother, the chaos, the activity of Shakti as represented by this proto-form of Kali. They brought the Dravidians into the temples and they learned from them. And through this, they reintegrated the divine feminine principle into Indian civilization and created a balance. Now, this is a process that happens over time where there's a swing back and forth between too much chaos or too much order, and a rebalancing has to happen. So let me now give you an example of this process of an imbalance forming between Shiva and Shakti, and let me explain to you how that balance can be regained by following the examples set by the Indian tantrics. So I am an American, and I have strong ties to American culture. And so personally, I resonate with cultural expressions, socio-religious expressions that are within the context of America. And two of the biggest cultural expressions that we have, most important cultural expressions we have in the United States, are the American Cowboy and the American Indian. And if you grow up in the United States, you're probably at some point in your life going to be exposed to these cultural expressions. Now, I personally very strongly resonate with the American Cowboy, but I also have a deep interest in the American Indian. And this is actually quite common. There are many people, especially in the American South, who have a strong connection to both of these cultural forms. And I am a white American, but like many white Americans, I have some very small American Indian ancestry, or there are many white Americans who have no real American Indian ancestry, but they like to say that they do because they like to have some kind of connection to the American Indian. They like to say they have a connection to the American Indian. Now, why is there this obsession with having a blood connection to the American Indian amongst many white Americans, especially in the American South? Reason for this is because white people have a strong natural connection to the Sahasrara chakra. They are a naturally very spiritual people. But this means that white people struggle to connect to the earth, and they struggle to connect to a solid identification with blood. Blood is more of a concept to white people, naturally, instead of something that is immediately experienced. So, seeking a strong connection to the blood, which we associate with Shakti, many white people will try to form some kind of sociocultural, and if they can push it even further, some kind of blood ancestry connection to the other, to a race that has a stronger connection to the earth, so that there can be this balancing that occurs. Now, this is the same thing that we saw in ancient India. There's this intense spiritualism that develops amongst the Indo-Aryan people who founded the Vedic civilization. And those who seek balance between Shiva and Shakti, they become obsessed with the other. So the Tantric yogins of ancient India, they became obsessed with the Dravidians and the Dark Mother Kali. Now, many white people in the United States, they might not be consciously aware that they're doing this, but they become obsessed with the other as well. And oftentimes, it's in the form of the American Indian. I have seen this reflected in art. In my personal assessment of art, I've seen this reflected, especially in country music. I love country and Western music. And one of the common tropes of country music is the white cowboy country singer who depicts and celebrates the life of the American Indian. There's many examples of this, and probably the most prominent example was in the music of Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash was a great friend to the American Indian, and he did a lot to advance the cause of native rights. He recorded albums that specifically talked about some of the struggles of American Indians, and he actually believed that he had Native American blood. And a lot of people to this day still think that Johnny Cash had American Indian blood, but in fact, he was entirely Scottish. So he had no actual American Indian blood, but he felt and desired a strong connection to the American Indian. Johnny Cash is an interesting figure because he also had a very, very strong connection to the American transcendence of Christian Protestantism. So the Christian Protestant in the American South is a very transcendent person. This is someone who directs their gaze to heaven constantly. They see the material world, the earth, nature as being a place of tooth and claw that is in a fallen condition. This is a place of sin and something to be transcended, to reject, so that you can access the kingdom of heaven. And Johnny Cash was obsessed with accessing the kingdom of heaven. But he was also obsessed with building a bridge to the pagan, heathen, earth tradition of the American Indian. Johnny Cash, being an empathetic man and a man who was genuine in his artistic expression, sought to truly apply the principles of how he interpreted Christ. And his interpretation of Christ, as I see it, was quite different from the average Christian. The average Christian does not really apply radically the principles of empathy, understanding, and compassion that we find in the New Testament. But Johnny Cash was someone who always resonated with the underdog, with the underclass, what we would associate with the Shudra and the untouchables in the Indian caste system. This is why Johnny Cash wore black. He wore black because he wanted to connect with those people who were downtrodden, who were the untouchables. He even wrote a song about it. Now, very interestingly, tantrics who try to connect with the untouchables and with the Shudra and with the underclass, they wear black. This is a traditional way to connect to Shakti, to cover yourself in black robes or black shirt and black pants. This is a way that we can integrate the other and have balance for heavy spiritualism. So Johnny Cash wasn't all about the bright white light of the Christian church. He was deeply obsessed with the dark things in life, and one of his dark obsessions was the plight of the American Indian. So
he was obsessed with like the shadow basically that was cast from that light, and that's like crazy because he's literally dressing up as a fucking black person, like not black as an African, but like black like in spirit, like the people that, yeah, you know what I'm saying. Yeah, anyway, sorry.
Well, I want to leave that in because that's very good what you just said.
Okay, well, I had the camera all crazy, but okay.
That's okay, because what Johnny Cash was tapping into basically was what we would call sympathy for the devil, okay? Because the people who were demonized in the culture, and especially at the time that Johnny Cash was recording a lot of these songs, like the Ballad of Ira Hayes, okay, which you should go listen to. It's very good. But at the time he was recording these songs, the American Indian was very persecuted and was seen as this devilish force. Of course, the Christians, when they came to the United States, or they came to America before it was the United States, they saw the gods of the American Indian as devils, right? And so there was an attempt to Christianize them brutally, take away their traditional names, give them Christian names, put them in the Christian schools. This was not something that Johnny Cash supported.
They fucking literally come to people's land, and then whenever people try to defend themselves, this is literally like fucking narcissistic gaslighting. They like come to people's lands, and then they start like beating on them and shit, and they're like, why won't you act right? And it's like any defense that they might give is then like piled into this, you're a devil, you're bad, you're the one doing this.
And so this abusive stream that the white Christian settler directed towards the American Indian, Johnny Cash had this same thing happening internally. Okay, so he was raised to feel shame towards his natural human animalistic tendencies. He was raised to feel shame. He was raised to reject those things. You know, his music, he generated a lot of controversy with his music. And there were certain organizations like the Ku Klux Klan who really had it out for Johnny Cash. They thought that he was a bad moral influence, right? Johnny Cash, he's one of the founding musicians of rock and roll. Okay, so he was playing the devil's music, and he was made to feel a lot of shame about that, right? And he always had this obsession with with his brother being this perfect person. His brother, who tragically died very young, was going to become a preacher. Okay, and so Johnny really looked up to him and remembered his brother, and he felt like he had to live up to that. He had to overcome his the things that he was taught to be shameful of. But at some point, I believe that he realized that these tendencies within him, this love for art and music and expression, and his obsession with the underdog, this wasn't an evil thing. This wasn't a bad thing. This was just something that was part of his dharma. And he expressed that very well in his music. But this is a problem that white people face in general, and have faced for a very long time. This idea that there's a part of themselves, this shadow aspect, that is bad, that is evil, that they need to run away from. And unfortunately, white civilizations for a very long time have taken their own internal struggle with the darkness and placed it on other people. And they've demonized other people who become the psychic projection of the things that they are afraid to embrace within themselves. So one of the problems with the way that white civilization has treated Shakti is that there's this compartmentalization and this obsession with the management of it. And this isn't a true integration. We can actually see this in Jungian psychology. Jung and the followers of Jung tend to treat the shadow, or Shakti, as something to be obsessed over, developing almost like a complex where there's this need to manage instead of actually release yourself to the experience of Shakti, right? Now, releasing yourself to the experience of Shakti doesn't mean that you have to be absorbed by it, doesn't mean that you have to throw yourself into it completely, go from one extreme to the other. It just means that you can have a genuine interaction with it. But it's not just, it's not just white people, but generally this is a white problem, civilizationally speaking, and we're talking about civilizations now. We should not put the divine feminine inside of us on a reservation, okay? Because that is not an integration or respect for Shakti. That is saying, okay, well, we have this thing inside of us, but what do we do with it? Let's compartmentalize. Let's make a compartment, a container for that thing and set it aside, right? But that's not a real integration, okay? The problem here is that we swing between two extremes. Either we find the other and we totally absorb them, mix completely and have no border between culture and no mutual respect for racial differences, cultural differences, structural differences, just differences in consciousness. Or we brutally repress and contain that thing, right? Those are generally the two approaches to dealing with the shadow or with Shakti that we see in white civilization. And that's what the American cowboy did with the American Indian. Either the white man was completely absorbed into this idea of Christian mercy and being and mixing completely, homogenizing everything under the banner of Christianity, or wiping the Indian out completely, or putting them in a box in a reservation. And the thing is, there are fundamental differences between whites and American Indians. There are fundamental differences between, all races that we can identify. And yeah, there's a gray area in what a race really is, but it's a combination of biology and the idea of race. These two things combine, right? But there are differences between people. And the thing is, healthy integration of differentiation means that we can exist with and celebrate these differences without being consumed by them, either by giving ourselves completely over to the other or by brutally attacking and repressing the other. This is not the dance. Within Tantric Yoga, we're always trying to find the dance, the Tandava, the dance between Shiva and Shakti, to find that healthy balance between the tendency towards dissolving in inertia, and the tendency towards dissolving in activity. So we are at this point now in the civilizational development of the American experience, American consciousness, that's very similar to what the Vedics experienced. We have on one hand this obsession with the rejuvenation of transcendent Christianity, of rejecting Shakti and going into the light of Shiva. In this cultural context is represented by Yahweh. Okay? And then we have, on the other hand, this embrace of chaos. Okay? And one side, which let's say just for the necessity of explaining things in a manner that is culturally digestible, we'll say one side is the conservative, right-wing, not just the Trump people, but just the conservative right in general that is gripping on to the Christian moral foundation or the Judaic moral foundation. And then you have on the other side the leftist tradition, which is just throwing everything aside and going into pure chaos. So we have these two poles, these two extremes, right? And the left is going to tend to focus on, the plight of the indigenous person, the plight of Shakti. And the right is going to focus on the order of Shiva. And so we have a split in these two forces. And if you have a split between Shiva and Shakti inside of your own body, this creates a complex within your body. Your body can't function. There's no harmony. There's no yoga. Well, in the United States of America, right now, there is no harmony. There's no yoga between these two forces. We have the psyche of this nation split between the divine feminine expression and the divine masculine expression, just like the psyche was split of ancient India. So how do we rejuvenate America, and how do we create a healthy culture that we can look to integrate into ourselves so that we can, as individuals, experience that harmony? We have to bridge the gap between Shiva and Shakti. We have to bridge the gap between the right wing and the left wing, between man and woman, between cowboy and Indian. We have to look to both of these cultural expressions and take what is healthy from those expressions and then combine them. And that is a tantric exercise. The problem that many white people have now is a twofold problem. For one, many of the people on the right, they don't want to see themselves as immigrants. They don't want to see themselves as conquerors. They don't want to see themselves as people who go to another land and take from others. But that is what white people do. White people are immigrants. And the United States of America was founded by immigrants. Now, you'll notice that many of the white people on the political right, they will project their own insecurity with the fact that they have this immigrant tendency onto other people, whether it's Mexican immigrants or Indian immigrants. They'll project that. They'll project it onto Jews. They'll say that, the Jewish people are the ones who go from place to place. They wander from place to place. And that's true. Jewish people do wander from place to place, but white people have wandered more than anybody. And that makes sense because we associate the Sahasrara chakra, Sahasrara consciousness with wandering. It is detached from the earth. It's the same expression of consciousness that led the Scandinavian people to go Viking and to get into boats and go across the North Sea to explore and to conquer. It's the same tendency that is leading white people to want to leave this planet, leave planet Earth, leave Mother Earth and go detach. That's the crown expression of consciousness. That's the Sahasrara. Now, on the other hand, we have certain white people who, realizing the unhealthy expression of this Sahasrara tendency, this masculine tendency, or those who've been abused by it, especially women, white women, who have been abused by that unhealthy or imbalanced expression of the masculine principle have thrown themselves completely into chaos as a way to instinctually rebel against that patriarchal system. And so these people, they want nothing to do with their white consciousness. They want nothing to do with their ethnic foundation, their cultural heritage. They want to reject it completely and burn it, and that is throwing yourself completely into the opposite direction. So the tantric answer, we can look to the example of the great tantric yogins, the Agoris of India, who traveled into the south. They learned from the people of Shakti. They did not reject the orderly foundation of Shiva. They created a dance inside of themselves, drawing from these cultural expressions. And we can do the same as Americans. We can look to what is healthy about the cowboy. What is healthy about the Indian?
Also, just to say, like, part of it too is that you have to become comfortable with being an outsider and being alien. Like, that's the thing that white people don't like. They want, you know, the spirit of like going to like, you know, some fucking black church or some shit. I don't know. That's not a good example, but they don't want to feel uncomfortable. They don't want to feel like they don't belong. But unfortunately, that's who you are. You don't fucking belong. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but you've got like freaky ass fucking blue eyes and your skin is literally bright white. Like, dude, you don't look like you're from here. Like, do you really expect people to treat you like a part of their fucking culture? It's crazy because, I don't know, that's like kind of like how white people in the South are. You know, they treat everybody like they don't belong.
Yeah.
And it's like, excuse me, sir, have you looked in the fucking mirror? Like,
yeah, that's a really good point, is that you have to accept who you are. This is part of expressing Dharma. You have to be able to accept who you are, you know. I do legitimately have a small amount of American
bullshit.
Indian
Quit
ancestry.
lying. You're lying.
I do.
You're fucking lying.
I am not.
You're the only special one.
I am not an American Indian. I am not an American Indian. I am very obviously a Scandinavian man living in the United States of America. But I find balance in my consciousness by embracing the other. And there's an obsession now, especially in esoteric circles, which are becoming more and more prominent as we proceed into the beginning of the age of Ajna, but there is this obsession in esoteric circles, especially amongst white people, with proving that, you know, the Indo-Aryans had blonde hair and blue eyes, and that the ancient Egyptians had blonde hair and blue eyes. They very well may have had blonde hair and blue eyes, but the thing is, the obsession misses the point entirely, which is that these cultural expressions, they do not have to be defined by blonde hair and blue eyes. If everything is defined by blonde hair and blue eyes, what you have is, once again, an obsession with whiteness, which is the Sahasrara. So to say that everything good in culture, everything grand in culture comes from this very narrow expression of blonde hair and blue eyes, this shows that if you're experiencing that obsession with blonde hair and blue eyes, this shows that there is an insecurity inside of you with your own Shakti. And so you have to reconcile that insecurity if you're going to be able to achieve yoga, if you're going to be able to achieve harmony of your consciousness. And we can do that by looking to beautiful expressions of culture and art and religion, anything, any cultural expression you want to look at from the other. We don't have to destroy the other. We don't have to micromanage the other. We can do a dance with the other. And by doing that, we can achieve what we're all trying to achieve here if you've come to this channel, which is yoga, union, harmony of consciousness, expressions of Dharma, and satisfaction in life.